Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us once again for our Michigan Poverty Task Force webinar. As you know, or I think many of you know, the Michigan Poverty Task Force is a body that was established by Governor Whitmer in 2019 with the goal of lowering Michigan's ALICE rate and poverty rates through collaborative efforts through 14 state departments. So we are really about breaking down silos, working collaboratively to solve problems. So I mentioned the Poverty Task Force is actually housed in the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. This program is definitely heavy on the opportunity side of things. We are really all about ensuring that we can open doors for prosperity for Michiganders who have been locked out. And so I can't think of a program that exemplifies that more than the Clean Slate program. We have discussed it before. We are just passing the 1 year anniversary of Clean Slate. And so we thought it would be a good time to have a conversation with some experts who are very familiar with the program and how it's been working, and the lived experiences of people who have been able to benefit from it and use it. And so I am going to introduce our panelists and our moderator, and then I'm going to turn things over to our moderator who will lead the discussion. But let me start with our panelists. Katrina Garrett serves as the Michigan State Police Set Aside and Expungement Unit Manager within the Criminal History Section. She began her career with the MSP in 2013 and has served in various roles within the Criminal History Section, as well as within Information Technology Division. Ms. Garrett has been in her current role since 2021, where she is responsible for daily operations pertaining to the conviction set aside and expungement processes. She served as in a lead role in the development and implementation of the automatic set-aside project and has been essential in the execution of business enhancements supporting the Clean Slate bills. Welcome, Katrina Garrett. We also have John Cooper, who is the Executive Director of Safe and Just Michigan. John's advocacy work focuses on Michigan's adult criminal legal system. During his time at Safe and Just Michigan, he has led several successful legislative campaigns, including the Michigan Clean Slate campaign. So we have John at least partially to thank for this program that we'll be discussing today. And finally, our last panelist is Kamal Sanderford, who joined Safe and Just Michigan in 2021 as the Clean Slate program manager. He brings 6 years of experience as an expungement attorney at the Cooley Law School's Access to Justice Clinic that was in Grand Rapids. While he was there, he saw Michigan's expungement law expand from being very restrictive to one of the most expansive laws in the country, and the first in the nation to offer automatic expungement of felonies. He earned his bachelor's degree in political science from Grand Valley State University in 2010, which makes me feel very old. And he graduated with a law degree from Cooley Law School in Grand Rapids in 2014. He was a staff attorney for the Access to Justice Clinic for 6 years. And our moderator today is someone who works very closely with us here on the Prosperity team at LEO, and that's Sophie Ordway, who is a data and policy fellow with the State Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. She has a master's in social work and has worked in various positions to reform our criminal legal system in Michigan. She is currently working closely with us here at LEO and in other state departments to improve economic outcomes for justice-involved individuals. So that is our panel. That is our moderator. And I'm going to turn things over to Sophie. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim, and thank you all for being here, and welcome to everyone that's joined the webinar. I'm really excited for the discussion today. Our first question is just going to I'm going to ask you all to kind of explain what is Clean Slate. John, I think it'd be great if we could start with you to talk about like what did the legislation do, and then maybe pop it over to you, Kamau, to talk about the programs that the Clean Slate legislation has been able to implement, and then Katrina, if you could talk about what MSP has been able to implement with the new Clean Slate legislation, that would be great.
So clean slate is an interchangeable term with criminal record sealing, set aside. There's a few other sort of legal terms that are used to describe the process, but the reason that we have these laws is to help people seal public criminal records so that those records no longer negatively impact a person's housing and employment opportunities. And there's a couple different processes for doing that now since the Clean Slate law passed, and I'll let Kamau discuss them.
Yeah, so prior to the Clean Slate law passing, the law was pretty restrictive. Under the previous law, you could have up to 1 felony and 2 misdemeanors on your record in total, in order to qualify for an expungement of a felony for offense, for example. Once the law passed in 2021, they expanded the petition eligibility requirements to up to 3 felonies and an unlimited amount of misdemeanor offenses, subject to meeting additional criteria under the law. So the law obviously expanded significantly in 2021. And then in 2022, the law was expanded to allow for first violation DUI offenses to be expunged. And that hadn't been the case prior to that law going into effect. And then in 2023, we saw the implementation of the automatic expungement system. And I know Katrina can touch on that more, but yeah.
And just to piggyback on this, the automatic process is intended to complement the petition process. It is focused on low-level nonviolent convictions that judges would normally grant without much concern. And the reason why an automatic process is needed is that the petition process was only serving a few thousand people a year when we have like 2.8 million records in the state police database. I mean, I've said over the years that like we could have every lawyer in every court in Michigan working around the clock to seal records through the petition processes, and they wouldn't really make a dent in that massive, massive pile of conviction records. So we needed a scalable solution, and that's what the automatic process is.
Yeah, so with the passing of the Clean Slate bill, the Michigan State Police was responsible for building this automatic set-aside program. So we call it a rules engine. When the bills were first implemented in April of 2021, we were inundated with petitions. So at that point, my unit didn't exist. So there were 3 staff members that were processing all of the applications. And so I came on board August of that year of 2021. And so that was my first task, was to kind of get that under control. So for us, we process the background checks for every single petition. So we went from 2,000, applications, petitions a year up to 15,000, 16,000. So it was quite a jump. So we implemented a better process as far as streamlining things and being able to provide electronic responses to the Attorney General's office. So we had a 13-week backlog, and we now have reduced it and stay around 2 weeks for turnaround time. So that was one of our responsibilities, is processing all of those, and then the building of the automatic set-aside program. So that also began in 2021, and we went live last year, April, and to date, we've been able to seal 1.4 million convictions.
That's a lot. That's great. So Kamau, I think you touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can dive a little bit deeper into what convictions, and I know you probably can't dive too deep because it's a lot, but what convictions are eligible for set-asides versus what aren't, via either Clean Slate petition versus automatic, and then how many convictions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so what I normally do is I'll list the offenses that cannot be expunged, and basically anything that isn't on that list can be expunged.
Okay.
So from the petition standpoint, life offenses, so offenses punishable by life, cannot be expunged through the petition process or through the automated process for that matter. Most CSC or criminal sexual conduct offenses cannot be expunged through the petition or automated process. Traffic offenses involving injury or death cannot be expunged through the petition or automatic processes. And then most of those offenses, in addition to those offenses, assaultive crimes cannot be expunged through the automatic process. They can be expunged potentially through the petition process, but there is a limit on the amount of assaultive crimes you can petition to have expunged, and it's 2 offenses. So the example that I use is if somebody has 3 assaultive crimes on their record, they can only petition to get 2 of the 3 expunged, and then those assaultive crimes cannot be expunged through the automatic process at all. Additionally, crimes that are punishable by more than 10 years, those can be expunged potentially through the petition process, but they aren't expungible through the automatic process. And so essentially any of those offenses that I just listed, if your offense doesn't fall into that category, it can potentially be expunged, which is the vast majority of offenses. In terms of the total amount of offenses that can be expunged either through the petition or the automatic process, through the petition process, you can have up to 3 felonies and an unlimited amount of misdemeanors potentially expunged through the petition process. And then through the automatic process, the system that Katrina referenced can expunge up to 2 felonies and 4 93-day or more misdemeanor offenses. There is an exception that allows for automatic expungement of misdemeanors that are 92-day or less. And there isn't a cap on the amount of offenses of 92-day or less misdemeanors that can be automatically expunged. So yeah.
And that process is being managed separately by the courts. And the reason for that is that a lot of the 92 or less misdemeanors are traffic cases, and those are typically not fingerprinted roadside. And the MSP database is structured around electronic fingerprints. So it just makes more sense for the courts to do that. The way the law was written, that just happens 7 years to the day from the conviction. And there's actually, and this has not been reported on very much, but there's actually a very large number of those convictions that have been sealed in addition to the 1.4 million that MSP has sealed. I don't have a clear number, but I've been told that the total number of convictions is more like 3 million if you add what the courts are doing. And so if you've got traffic offenses, they're probably getting sealed by the courts.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that. So basically you're saying, and I think this was mentioned in the beginning, that, you know, Michigan's clean slate laws are one of the most expansive, or some of the most expansive in the country. Like, we are kind of setting the lead, or leading by example, to show that, you know, we can really give a lot of people a second chance or a clean slate to do some of the things that they would not have been able to do with the convictions that they previously had on their record. For somebody who, you know, maybe wants help figuring out if they are eligible, my understanding is that there are clinics happening across the state, and that each county might have different programs available for folks to go in and either seek help from an attorney or just find out what is on their record and whether or not they are eligible for clean slate. Do you have just kind of like an overview of some of the places people can go, or websites, or something that where people can find resources to find out how they are, whether or not they're eligible for clean slate?
Yes, so what I would encourage people to do, a couple of things. So on our website, we list every expungement fair that we're directly involved with, which is happening across the state. They can go to www.safeandjustmi.org to get a list of those upcoming expungement fairs. They can also go to the Michigan Attorney General's office. They list every expungement fair that is coming up. around the state, so they can go to the Michigan Attorney General's website as well. They can also contact their legal aid organization in their service area. So each county has a legal aid that's associated with that specific county. And the good thing about them is they have an expungement program throughout the year. So, you know, you don't have to wait for an expungement fair or clinic to attend. You can reach out to them as well if you're in need for assistance. And then Katrina, I know you guys have a system in place that people can at least check to see what offenses, and you can touch on that as well.
Yes, so on our website, you can go to michigan.gov/clean slate, and you can go through, we have like a Q&A where an individual can essentially run their iChat and answer the questions. So it'll ask like, is this a 93-day misdemeanor, yes or no? And so it goes through the offenses. And then we also have like an MCL lookup where they can enter the language of the crime or the actual MCL PAT code itself. And it will let the individual know if that offense is eligible or not eligible. And if it's not eligible, why it's not eligible. And then another thing that that can be done is if an individual does run their iChat and they want to know specifically by what is returning on their iChat, I do have a staff of 4 that they go through. We have a general mailbox and they answer questions from the public with those iChats. So they'll go through and review and identify if this individual specifically like for this iChat, possibly if something didn't get set aside, why it was not set aside, as long as it's public information. So let's say, for instance, there's more than one assaultive crime, then we can go through and say, based off of this, we can see that you have 2 assaultive crime convictions, therefore will not be eligible for automatic process. So that's another way for individuals to find out.
For people seeking free legal services, we have a great network of legal aid organizations in Michigan. They actually have a unified intake number. It's called the call line, and you can just Google that. I think we've got a link on our website as well. But you're eligible for legal aid if your income is within 200% of the poverty line. So for a family of 4, that's like $60,000. And there's also certain counties have clean slate. Like Oakland County has a clean slate program that we're aware of. There's some very good attorneys that are involved with that. So there's like a lot of opportunities, but you know, we've heard from most people that like this is kind of technical and you need help to navigate these systems. So even for the automatic expungement, I think people just like looking at the law or looking at a news article have a hard time understanding exactly how it might apply to their record. So we've found that people need some kind of legal guidance, even if not necessarily a lawyer.
It sounds like if you are questioning or wondering whether or not you're eligible, or if you have questions about the process, it's good to seek out that legal help from a local legal aid office in your county or jurisdiction. So now that it's been 1 year since automatic expungements have gone into effect, I'm wondering if each of you can talk a little bit about some of the successes and some of the challenges that we've encountered as a state with the law change. Maybe I'll pass that one off to Katrina first.
So successes, number 1 is the program itself. That was a huge lift, huge lift. I mean, just the fact that we had to pull every single MCL PAT code that ever existed from the beginning of time and research them and identify them. And so the fact that we implemented on time, that was a huge success. And another success would be the relationships. I work very closely with Kamau and Safe and Just. We try to be a part of all of their expungement fairs. We do our best to answer any questions from the public. We work very closely with legal aid offices. We have weekly meetings with the state court administrator's office, and we listen, and we want to do whatever we can to help the individuals and then help those that are leading programs. So that's been also a huge success, is the relationships that we built.
Couldn't agree more with with that. I mean, the first day of automatic expungement, 842,000 people roughly got at least one conviction sealed, and there was something like 250,000 that got their records wiped entirely clean on day one. It's just staggering numbers, and we were really happy to see those. I think there's still interest in working on this and doing more, which gets me excited too. So I would say that's another success. There's no bad vibes. Other states have had delays that have been battles between the advocates and the government. We didn't have any of that here, or very little, and I just think that's all really important.
Yeah, I would just echo everything John and Katrina said. The ability for everyone to kind of come together and recognize that, you know, it's in everyone's interest to work together to assist people with either getting their records expunged through the petition process, or at least notifying them or letting them know what offenses have been expunged through the automatic process. That's been extremely beneficial for everyone involved. So yeah.
Thanks. And John, you mentioned that you are seeing, interest in continuing to improve some of the challenges that you've come across. Can you talk a little bit more about what those improvements might bring about?
Yeah, and I should just say we released a report a couple weeks back on the 1-year anniversary, detailing some of the areas in which we think we can continue to improve the system. I'll mention one, and I know Kamau's got a couple others, but I think the most important thing we can do is to improve access to people's records. Because we have some records that are just in the courts and some that are just at MSP, it's hard to, figure out exactly everything that's on your record. Our courts, of course, are not in a unified system. So if you have convictions in multiple jurisdictions, you have to go to all those courts to collect your record, and it can become, challenging for folks. So if we could get all those records into one place and create a free online portal that people can go to and see, okay, my record got sealed, or my record will be sealed in a year, that kind of stuff, that would really improve public understanding of the law. And public understanding of the law is essential to there actually being an impact, because if a person doesn't know that their record's sealed, they're not going to change their behavior. They're not going to stop checking that box. So it's really important that we continue to do outreach and continue to improve public access to information around the law.
And it sounds like, I think that was one of the questions that we got in the chat too, if people are notified if they have had an automatic expungement. It sounds like that's something we need to keep working on.
It is. I mean, the reality of notice is that the government doesn't know where people are, 10, 20, 30 years after a conviction. Now, if we look across systems to say Secretary of State, Treasury, get tax information, unemployment information, like the data is out there, but it's siloed, and data sharing between these systems is a real challenge. But I do dream of a day where, your record's automatically sealed and you get an email or a text that day. That'd be awesome.
Right.
But, we're a ways off of that.
Kamau, did you have some other things that you wanted to touch on in terms of improvements?
So a couple of things. There are cases where offenses perhaps should have been automatically expunged that haven't been automatically expunged because of limitations within the system itself. And I know Katrina is well aware of those limitations. And one thing I've been encouraged by is, everyone's aware of the issues, and we're all working together to address those issues. It's not like we're blind to those issues. So yeah, that's one that stands out to me. In doing a number of these fairs, we tend to see people with older convictions that perhaps should have been automatically expunged that haven't because the conviction doesn't have a MCL code assigned to it, for example. So that's something that, I hope that one day we can work to rectify moving forward. And then there are issues with cases that don't have a final disposition. So if you've ever looked at an iChat or background check, you may see that somebody was charged with an offense, but you may not necessarily see what they were convicted of. It may say something like no data received or something to that effect. And those offenses have proven, or those cases have proven to be problematic when in terms of automatically expunging certain offenses. Because it prevents the system essentially from automatically expunging other offenses on that person's record. So those are challenges that, have come up since the law went into effect.
Yeah, there was a discussion when the bills were moving around, like, if a person has open charges, should they get their record automatically sealed? And people felt that the answer was no, but the problem we've discovered is that in many prosecutors' offices and other circumstances with the courts, the case may just be left open for decades, and it's really a shame if a person is not getting an automatic expungement because a prosecutor's office didn't close out their case. And I know that's an issue that folks are aware of and working on, but I also am aware that has prevented a lot of people from getting automatic expungements, especially in places like Wayne County.
Gotcha.
I'd like to also add, as far as challenges, John mentioned the siloed information. So part of the automatic expungement process was the communication with Department of Corrections for felony records. So we are also aware, and that is something that we are actively working on, is there is a delay in some of the felony records as far as being processed for automatic expungement, because we do have to get information from Department of Corrections. And even though we built a web service to communicate with them, our systems don't exactly match. Again, it's siloed information. So we created a problem queue to at least capture those records. And we are actively working every day and trying to clear those records out. So that way those individuals can get those felonies set aside. And we are currently in a phase 2 of the automatic set aside project, where we will be enhancing that communication to reduce those the problem queue numbers where the felony records are being held up.
That's great. So it sounds like, I think with any new, especially such an expansive law change like this, there's always going to be bumps in the road. And it sounds like everyone is aware and on track to tackle those challenges. So that's really encouraging to hear. And I think Katrina at the beginning, and maybe John, you two have mentioned, how many Michiganders have benefited from the clean slate law changes from 2021, and then also the automatic change in 2023. But I'm wondering if you could reiterate some of those numbers. How many people have benefited, and how many more do we know, if we know this, are eligible to benefit, potentially, that may not have yet benefited because they have yet to petition, or they're just not aware of the automatic. And then to kind of double up on that, maybe some of you could share some success stories that you've heard from folks that have benefited from the changes.
I have new stats if you want me to provide the stats, and then you two can do the success stories. So for the automatic expungement program, since we did again hit our 1-year anniversary, we have set aside 1.4 million convictions. Of those, 1,286,355 are misdemeanors, and felonies 125,900. And then as far as individuals who have had at least one conviction set aside, that's 915,530. And then and the number of individuals who have a clean slate due to the automatic expungement process, that's 285,000 individuals. As far as the potential individuals who could be eligible, John mentioned before that our repository is roughly 2.8 million individuals with active criminal records. 550,000 are not eligible due to the types of offenses. So that leaves about roughly 1.3 million individuals who could become eligible.
A lot of Michiganders.
Mhm.
It's great.
Eight to
Yeah,
10.
so any success stories? I think Safe and Just, you guys had like a really great success story on your webinar a couple weeks ago, but any stories you'd be willing to share would be great.
Yeah, I mean, Alvina is someone we met through an expungement fair, and her record was automatically sealed, and she went on to get a really great new job at Wayne State. So happy for her. We actually have a few different videos we also produced over the years on our YouTube. You can find us there, Safe and Just Michigan page. A couple of my favorites are Tommy Barnes and Erica Edwards.
Thanks. And I'm wondering too, if you could talk just briefly a little bit about, in addition to, being eligible for new jobs or having a career change, what are some of the other practical benefits of having your record expunged? What other doors does it open?
Yeah, I mean, it's surprisingly broad in the way it affects a person's life. One thing I kept on hearing from people during the campaign was that people with felony records couldn't volunteer at their kids' schools, couldn't coach baseball, couldn't take their kids on field trips. And that, I think, hits home for people. Even beyond the employment and housing issues people tend to face. Other areas we've seen issues, business licensure, business liability insurance, access to loans. It's just, if you look at all the ways a person can, improve their lives and be socially mobile, many of those paths are cut off by an old criminal record. And that, I think, underscores the importance of what we're working on here.
Great. I've got one last question that we had that we have for you guys, but then I'm going to try to jump to some of the questions that we're getting in the chat as well. So in terms of spreading the word about Clean Slate and getting more folks access to help to see if they're eligible or get their records expunged, what are ways that organizations and people outside of the state of Michigan can help support or promote the Clean Slate initiative?
Well, we do have a national partner called the Clean Slate Initiative that is helping to support Clean Slate campaigns in various states and also at the federal level. I think there's 12 states now that have some form of a Clean Slate law. And I've spoken with the folks working on campaigns in those states, just as a matter of common interest. And the more and better Clean Slate laws that get passed, I think the easier it is to improve our own laws. A lot of times lawmakers look to other states and say, hey, well, if this other state has done it, if Pennsylvania's done it, if Utah's done it, well, we can do it too. And so we're all, trying to create this rising tide across the country to raise all boats.
Great. All right, so I'm going to try to get through some of these questions in the chat. So I think this one might be for you, Kamal. Can you speak to the one bad night exception, specifically enhancements? Are they automatically set aside or are they included in one felony? Example is if a defendant has 7 felonies on one night with 2 enhancement, what happens with those enhancements? Does that make sense to you?
I think I get the drift of what they're trying to say. So one bad night exception is applicable to the petition process. It's not applicable to the automatic process. So when we're screening a client or we're looking at an iChat, normally what we'll see is multiple felonies seemingly arising out of one incident. There are some exceptions to that exception. So like assaultive crimes cannot be combined essentially or treated as one for purposes of the one bad night exception. So if somebody has multiple or even just one assaultive crime along with a retail fraud, you can't combine the two or treat them as one offense because the assaultive crime would disqualify that person. Does that answer their question or no?
I can jump in a little bit more. I mean,
Yeah.
the reason that provision was passed was to deal with situations where a person gets multiple charges from a single incident. So the example, if you get caught selling drugs, you get charged with, how many times you were observed doing it. Also, there's a conspiracy charge. If you've got a gun on you, there's a gun charge. And you didn't do like multiple separate crimes, really. So it's not fair to say you're ineligible for an expungement because you got so many stacked charges there. And that was what always happened under the old system, where it was no more than one felony or two misdemeanors. There was no provision for what you get multiple charges and it's 3 felonies or more. You were just kind of stuck. So this was designed to account for those situations. The challenge is when there's like a series of incidents over the course of like 24 hours, that you get into gray area legally about whether that applies. But because it's within the petition process, we don't need to make the rules engine deal with those different scenarios, and a judge can figure it out. So, I mean, I think like a lawyer familiar with One Bad Night can advise, can look at the case and say, like, I think the judge would grant this, or I think the judge wouldn't. But because it's a new law and there's some gray area in it, it's hard to say with certainty whether a given case would fall within that or not.
Thank you, that's helpful. And I believe we had one question in the chat. I have some questions that I think are related, so I'm going to start with this first one. Can one of you talk just about the difference between sealing a record and expunging a record? Are they the same thing? What does sealing actually mean? Does it mean the record goes away forever, that nobody can see it?
So I don't know, Katrina, if you want to take this
Yeah,
one, but
yeah.
I'll at least say it means different things in different states.
Yeah. So for the conviction set-asides, that's generally referred to as expungements in the public, but for our purposes and processing, there is a difference. So conviction set-asides, that's what we're referring to as expungements right now, and the sealing of records. And when a record is sealed, it is very, it's limited as far as who will have access for fingerprint-based background checks, and it's no longer available to the public. And most common uses as far as access would be like criminal justice, law enforcement, employment. So it's very limited as far as who can have access to that information. And then a true expungement for us, it's the destruction of biometric data. So we are a fingerprint-based state. So when a individual has a case where it's been dismissed or found not guilty, they can file for the removal of the actual fingerprint information. So we would delete everything from our repository. As long as the judge signed the order, we receive the order, then we can go through, and that's what a true expungement is. But again, conviction set-asides are typically referred to as expungements in the public.
Gotcha. So clean slate, anyone that is getting a clean slate through this program it's a conviction set aside where employers or housing, landlords would not be able to see it, but some law enforcement agencies would still be able to. So that another person asked, and I think this is related, can somebody who has a sealed or a set aside record, can that be unsealed for some reason at some point in the future by like a landlord or an employer, or is it only ever going to be visible to law enforcement in certain situations?
So there is a very narrow exception in the law. This is specific to automatic expungements, whereby if a person owes restitution and they're not paying that restitution in good faith, the crime victim can go to the court and say, I don't think this person deserves to have their records sealed. I don't know that this is happening very often, but that is a situation that can occur, but only if there's an issue with restitution. Beyond that, I mean, I suppose there are other ways it could happen, but I'm not familiar.
And just to add to that, though, yeah, a court can reinstate the conviction for the reasons mentioned, but there is a process in place that the state court administrators put out to all courts. And so even in those situations where if the victim did come forward, the court still has to notify the individual and give them, an opportunity to still pay it. So that way that record could remain sealed.
Thank you. And I think that, so this was a question earlier on too, and I wanted to ask those first two because I had a feeling that one might speak to this next question too, but I'm sure there's concern from folks too about, with all of these records being expunged, somebody asked, how will the Clean Slate law protect vulnerable populations, children and older adults from past offenders who may have had theft, drug charges, et cetera, expunged? I think, Kamal, what you were talking about earlier about truly assaultive or certain offenses that, have certain convictions, either for life or 10 years or longer, would you say that the types of offenses that are eligible for expungement now are not typically the types of offenses that we're seeing folks reoffending from and posing a threat to public safety? And I guess, what are your thoughts on the safety concerns related?
I can address that one. I mean, I think there's a couple issues here. But I think the first one is the assumption that an old conviction is evidence a person is dangerous. And there's actually a lot of research on this. And that research says that after 5 years, a person who gets an expungement is no more likely than a member of a general public to get in trouble. That's a study that was published in the Harvard Law Review based on 30,000 Michigan expungements. And as you mentioned, the most serious kinds of crimes are not eligible to be expunged.
Gotcha. Thank you. Somebody asked too about a list of acceptable versus non-acceptable offenses, and I think we discussed that earlier in terms of those are probably listed either on the MSP website, in which I think Denise dropped that link into the chat, but also probably on Safe and Just's website as well. Is that right?
We did put a list of
Yeah, we have a list, and I know the Attorney General's website, they have a list as well.
Great. And then somebody also asked, currently there are some barriers in place for individuals to receive housing assistance with misdemeanors or minor offenses that could have been expunged. Have there been any efforts to reach out to grassroots organizations or those in housing advocacy specifically on improving access and the necessary steps to expunge records? Are there housing nonprofits or housing advocacy agents that are involved at expungement fairs that you all hold?
So I know we've worked with housing agencies in the past. Fair Housing Center is one that comes to mind. They were recently at a fair that we did at Cooley Law School. So yeah, we have actively engaged with housing agencies.
Yeah, and I should say, expungement is not the only way that advocates are working on helping people with records access better housing. So there's bills in the legislature right now, 4948 and 4960, that limit what employers and landlords can ask about in terms of sealed convictions. There's a bill 4878 that very sharply limits what landlords can ask about, even unsealed conviction-wise. And those kinds of policies are needed in addition to expungement in order to create more opportunity and access to housing in particular. Because the reality is, I think, as I said before, people overestimate how good of evidence old convictions are of a person's future behavior, especially after a person has desisted from crime for a number of years. I think, this is something that the background check industry has pushed over the years. And, I think we just need to try and present the facts about recidivism rates, because there's a lot of misconceptions in society, especially in HR offices and among landlords, about what we should really be looking at. Especially, they should be looking at how old is the conviction? Is it related to the job a person's going to have? Is it related to being a resident somewhere? And those kinds of questions aren't getting asked consistently. And if they're not getting asked consistently, people aren't getting the information they need to make good decisions.
Thank you. And one person asked this question, which I think is very pertinent. So how should a person with a set-aside conviction respond to the question on an employment application, have you ever been convicted of a felony?
The answer is no. What the law says is that if you get an expungement, it is legally as if that conviction never occurred.
Right. Okay, so, and this one, I think, Kamal, you may have already talked about this, but this one just came in. What's the average length of time that's passed from now since the time the offense occurred? I believe they're asking when you're eligible for expungement, how long do you have to wait to be eligible from when the offense occurred? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the wait period will vary depending on the petition process or the automatic process. With the petition process, the wait period for non-serious misdemeanors is 3 years. For one felony is 5 years, and for multiple felonies, so 2 or 3 felonies, is 7 years. And that's for the petition side of things. And then for the automatic side of things, the wait period is 7 years from the sentencing date for misdemeanors, and then 10 years from either the sentencing date or release from imprisonment from MDOC with felony offenses.
And those waiting periods are actually longer than the research suggests are necessary to be confident that a person's not going to reoffend.
Gotcha. So I think we have gotten to a lot of the questions, but probably not all of them. It's really great to see so much participation from folks viewing the webinar. I would definitely encourage people to access the information on the MSP website, which we've dropped into the chat a couple times, and you can also Google Safe and Just Michigan and find their website. They have lots of information on Clean Slate eligibility and resources for where you can find help to learn more about whether or not you're eligible and where you can find legal support. And I just want to say thank you all to the panelists and to everyone who's viewing the webinar for being a part of this discussion. This was a really great opportunity to learn more about Clean Slate and how it's contributed to some of the Poverty Task Force's goals in improving Michiganders' economic outcomes. And yeah, thank you all so much for being here. This was really great.